Sponge and Thorin on an analyst desk. If I told young Sam that this was happening right now, she'd be completely freaking out. But I've got older and bitter, so now I just don't care. What's up,
To be
gents?
fair,
Welcome.
if you told current Thorin that, he'd probably start freaking out. How'd that happen, eh?
Oh, there we go. So there's that too. This is pretty exciting to have both of you here. And I promised myself I wasn't going to fangirl, and then of course, the moment I started talking, I did. So I'll try and keep it all inside and be
good.
super professional. It won't happen, but we'll try. Here we are, Feed the Trolls, and we're going to be talking specifically today about dev1ce and him as an in-game leader. But before we do that, I've noticed that there's been this like influx of what I like to call COVID gamers. So it's a bunch of people who have suddenly decided that they're really into Counter-Strike. That either happened during COVID or they try to play Valorant and realize that it wasn't as good as they thought it was. So let's explain, because they're watching and they might not know who dev1ce is or why we speak about him with such awe. So let's explain why we love dev1ce so much and what he did in the past. Thorin, we can start with you.
It's a bit of a layup for me, isn't it? Like, I've only spent half my career glazing him, as the kids say. No, actually, one of the things I'm able, sadly, to take credit for, I wish this wasn't the case, Chad, but when it comes to people like Simple, dev1ce, Nico, somehow I'm like one of the first people on the train. I'll never get it, because to me, in different ways, these are all just obvious talents. Like, if people don't remember, I think the first time I saw dev1ce play, because I wasn't a Source person, obviously, and the only Source I watched was years before that. Like, it was the beginning of CSGO, obviously, and I remember Anders, early on when I first met him, told me there are two players in Denmark who are supposed to be insane. One was the guy Nico with a C, the AWPer that played with Glaive and Pimp and later MSL. He's someone, if people don't know, was just like one of those talents that never practiced the game, unfortunately. So he was only good at the beginning of the game when he could get away with that. And then the other one he said is this guy dev1ce. I remember watching and being like, look, he's a really skilled player. But the irony of ironies is, I remember thinking, though, I don't think this guy's going to be a star player, though, Mick. If you ever watched how he played, he did play like he was a bit nervous, or he was a bit like thinking overly. And in fact, famously, back in the day, a lot of people won't know this, they think he used to just be a rifler and then he switched to being an AWPer and became the primary AWPer. But actually, the interesting thing was, he always used to be a hybrid AWPer. He always used to use the AWP, but this is exactly why his career story is like a movie. Because the funny thing was, I actually always thought back then he was way better with the AWP, because obviously if you have an amazing AWP game, as CSGO taught us, it's probably a better gun than the rifle, unless you're some like weird anchor or something like that, you know, or a guy who has to win the clutch at the end of the round. So what you would see his game, though, is he had this incredible talent, and if he was feeling it or it was the right half of a map, he would just take over with the AWP, and he'd look at the best AWPer in the server, even if he was playing like NIP or Guardian back in the day. But the difference was, it looked like if he ever got tight in the game and felt a bit nervous, he went purely to the rifle, and he would just play like the safest angle possible, like, you know, the off angle where you just get the guaranteed one kill, but he'd never take the like sort of aggressive angle. So believe it or not, this is actually what got me mega interested in this player, because I'm always like, it's obvious when someone's like Simple and they have insane talent and they're going to break through no matter what. It's obvious when someone, by the way, just doesn't have the talent and they're not going to get to the top. It doesn't matter how cool they are, great. The most fascinating player in Counter-Strike to me at any point in time is the player with insane talent level, but it's their own mind or something about how they currently see the game that gatekeeps them. So, like, the obvious example I could give in the modern days, this is why I'm actually fascinated by his team with Stown now, because the guy's clearly really good at the game, but it's something in his mind that stops him from winning the major, being the MVP, carrying over players I think are actually worse. So the cool thing about dev1ce's story, he's not only one of the best players of all time, I think he actually has like almost like a comic book superhero movie origin story. And actually, what I just described there, like the genesis, basically that's him and his whole team's career. It's just a scaled up version of that, like overcoming these issues, showing your potential. So to me, by the end of CSGO, I've always said this, I actually do think, while it's kind of legit that like Glaive and Zipix and all them are like, yeah, Simple was the GOAT, I've always just said, come on, get your boys back. He was the majors and all the MVPs. Like, listen, can't you at least say something like, well, I didn't play with Simple, so the greatest player I ever played with was dev1ce. Because even though I don't actually think he's the GOAT, I'm glad there are people like Launders who actually will say that they're going to take that stance, because if you were as great as this player was in every regard, body of work, accomplishments, longevity, someone should have you in the GOAT conversation. So I think that's a pretty good place to start. He started out as this troubled, you know, unpolished gem. And at the end, I actually think, unironically, if I wasn't just incredibly biased to what my eyes saw from Simple, on paper, this guy was the greatest Counter-Strike player ever.
Yeah. The jewel in the crown of Astralis for sure. And then you think about all the achievements that he has, the MVPs, the 4 majors, and then you bring in the play style. I think that there are that like people could make an argument for him to be the GOAT. I don't think he's the GOAT either, but people could definitely make that argument.
Yeah.
Like, that's how good that we're talking. And the playstyle thing that you're just bringing up there that I always love about dev1ce is he's the type of AWPer that he's not just going to use the AWP when the situation doesn't require it. He has the AWP in a round. Maybe his teammate dies, the rifle gets dropped on the ground. It's better for him to take that space with the AK. He will do that. And that's great because to me, he's a player who's not out there for the highlights, right? He's out there to win the round. And dev1ce has always struck me as that kind of guy. And the thing is, he also has these flashy moments. Think about that train round that he had. Was that against, was it NRG?
NRG,
yeah,
yes.
That was insane. Like the moments that dev1ce could have, unrivaled other than the other greats that we talk about. And yeah, he doesn't really get the same shine. Because, yeah, look, he didn't get himself number one in the world as per the HLTV world rankings, right? But otherwise, it's a stacked cabinet. And, yeah, I think across the board from top to bottom, you spoke about the early days. There's even the controversy in recent time, which he's now attempting to bounce back from. And so far, it's pretty good signs since getting back into a Danish jersey. And I think that dev1ce, the story, the influence that he's had in Counter-Strike as a 28-year-old man, yeah, he's definitely going to go down as one of the greats.
It's incredible because Thorin mentioned there about the superhero story, and we all know like Marvel just copy pastes what they call the hero's journey every single time. And he's had that hero's journey, right? Starts off a little bit troubled, rises to the top, has his pajama jail, and then he ends up back at Astralis. Were you surprised, Spunj, when Astralis announced that they were bringing him back?
Yes, but in a good way, right? It was like it's something that should never even happen in the first place, right? We all know why he left Astralis to go to NIP. He was following love, he was following his heart, and we all know that's a big mistake, right? Sit with the one thing that has given you love all
Not
the time.
bitter at all, Chad. I know.
My cold, jaded heart. But he followed his heart, and it should have stuck with Counter-Strike, right? Because that caused a massive hiccup. That caused a massive hiccup for him within his career. And the fact that he was over there in an NIP team that didn't even seem like they were serious about building behind him, right? I would have fucking benched myself as well. They were just giving him academy players to work with. This is a player that was still, coming out of the Astralis prime. Sure, Astralis was a mess at that point, and it wasn't really working necessarily as good as it can, but this is dev1ce, who, as I said before, was the jewel in the crown. He was the star player of the team. He was the AWPer in a period where AWPers were always the best player in the world, and NIP weren't giving him what he needed. And now he's returned to Astralis. They had this whole BlameF situation go down, and now with him taking over the leadership over there, I think for him to be turning the page in that direction on his career now, maybe that's a little bit early, but yeah, I went off topic there. Sorry.
By the way, though, I'll tell you one thing that you were mentioning there, though, that I think's worth adding is that's why when I did these recent interviews with people like Plopsky and Hampers and these people that were in NIP, probably the most infuriating thing to find out is that, like, it was just NIP management who kept all the changes. Like, for real, all those players, before they ever got Esotex, they just wanted Brolan then. And you would actually have had potentially like a whole year, guys, where it would have been like Hampus, Rez, Brolan, dev1ce, and then I can't remember who the fifth would be, but like some insane lineup that, like, remember, dude, when dev1ce got benched, they made like the quarters of that major when they played FaZe at Antwerp. Like, imagine if they'd actually had dev1ce in the lineup, like, for real, and Brolan. Like, that team for real could have like won a major on its own. So I always think that's actually a sad thing too, because even though it's cool he's like transitioned to a different role as Astralis, you would have had like the proper chance to see what happens if he's in a really good team that isn't Astralis, but we never really had that in his career.
This is like the constant conversation we keep having about management making bad decisions for players in certain teams. But we can dive into that. But I want to talk a little bit more about the dev1ce move back to Astralis. And then there was obviously the Stabby issue. Stabby arrives. I thought when we saw that lineup on paper, it was going to be epic. And obviously, I really felt like Astralis had something miraculous. And maybe it was a little bit of that dream of going back to the Astralis era. But I believed the forums where everyone started saying Astralis is back. Why didn't that work, though, in the setup with BlameF as IGL?
I've turned into like a noisy BlameF hater in a way, and I think BlameF's a very strong rifler, right? I just want to make that clear. I just think in terms of an in-game leader and his playstyle in Counter-Strike, it's very selfish. And when I've been playing, I'm trying to pug a lot more. I'm trying to pug an awful lot more. So I'm trying to get back into my roots, And as I'm pugging a lot more, and if I see players who are betas, there's nothing that tilts me off the face of the earth more. Because Counter-Strike, for me, at the baseline, I was playing when stats weren't, used as they are today, right? I understand my early CSGO days, they were, but, coming 1.6 source, my early professional career, it wasn't the numbers, it was winning a game of Counter-Strike, right? And then since these numbers have come in, players have become a lot more selfish, obviously, because you can go far with good stats. We've seen that happen. But the baiting playstyle is the opposite for me of what Counter-Strike is all about. It's a team game. We're trying to work as a team to get to the end goal of winning the round. I will throw my life away if it means I'm going to get traded and we win that round, right? That's the mentality I would want with a lot of my teammates. Unfortunately, with how good BlameF is on the rifle and playing some of these positions, and kind of when he first came out the gates, he got a lot of praise for his work ethic, but then his tenure as in-game leader with Complexity, that was a mixed bag. In the beginning, it was good, and then it got soured after like Obo had gone, and then different names like JKS and Cold Zero were coming in. They even got 16-0'd, like everything started to go down the gurgler. And then in Astralis, it was good early because it felt like it was the honeymoon. The team was getting hyped. I was calling it like the attitude era because dev1ce was yelling, Blame was yelling. Everybody was a bit more staunch in the team. But you saw that simmer away quite quickly, and their playbook was very one-dimensional. It put a leash on individuals like Stown and Yabby, who usually have a lot of autonomy, especially when they were in Heroic. And they were just getting put in a lot of 4-1 situations. They weren't really able to play out mid-rounds. And you neutered some of the best parts of those players from their time in Heroic for a play style that wasn't conducive to getting the best out of them, and a play style that probably wasn't even on meta with where Counter-Strike was at the time. So there was a few issues there. And I think that one of the things missing as well was strong leadership for the team from a coaching perspective to help, squash some of those problems and push them in the right direction. I gave this Ronick kid, a couple of jabs. It's not directed at him. It should be directed at Astralis for letting a kid that looks like, it's like bring your younger brother to work day or some shit. And he's there when he's given the fist bumps. The players look annoyed about having to give this guy a fucking fist bump, man. So there was a few problems. There was definitely a few problems, but I just think BlameF is a great player, just not suited to the leadership role. And that's one of like, that's what it boils down to for me.
Do you think there was a world though? Because I did think it was a little bit unfair to use him as the scapegoat. I mean, we'll focus on the BlameF conversation for a little bit because I felt like that lineup was good. Was it not just a matter of moving some roles around, Thorin? And like Chad said, getting a better coach, which I think they were discussing at the time anyway. I mean, did they have to really drop him completely, or do you think that the relationship amongst the players had probably soured at that point?
This is where I actually think that the analogy I will give is to when G2 kicked/benched Alexi B, right? Because what fans do is they go, well, what did Alexi do? Whereas Huxley won all the... No, there was no JKS in the Alexi B lineup. And I'll never accept anyone who thinks you can leave that detail out because they didn't have the same team. So one of the problems I do have with this case here is I actually agree with what you were saying at the end there, which is I think the dirtiest thing they did to BlameF, who, by the way, I also agree with Chad. I actually think after Complexity, he should never have been an in-game leader. It didn't make his game any better, even though people thought he only called it by himself, and he could do all the same things without being in-game leader. So to me, there was no upside to it. But I do think the area they did him dirty was this. I always remember very key phrases from interviews that are related to topics like this. And there was an interview, I think it was on HLTV, where basically they'd said something to BlameF. I think this is when he initially took over being IGL. Someone had asked him something, how did it come about that you're like the in-game leader now and like Glave's benched or whatever? And he said some really telling phrase that was like, oh, they asked me like if I would do it or something, and I said yes. And it's like, whoa, what is that question? What? Like, bro, no, it's supposed to be like the job you want to do. And like you went to them and said, hey, like if you bench Glaive, like, I can do this role and take this. So that's already like a worrying sign, because that sounds to me like Astralis has sort of gone, will you do us a favor? And then you do them a favor, and then they go, actually, fuck your favor, and then fire you, which is like, what? So that's already, I think, mad egregious. And then two, like I alluded with the Alexi B example, where was his coach? So if I'm a guy who's never been a great in-game leader, and I've got, by the way, veterans like dev1ce who need a great in-game leader and coach, and I've got newer players who've only come up the last couple of years, I can't have some nobody as my coach. And in Astralis, by the way, during almost the entire time BlameF was there, they had weird coaches and newer people and people who'd never done the job before. So I do think it's a bit dirty that, like, if I were them, if you're going to accept the idea he becomes in-game leader, even ask him to do it, I think you should have given him someone like Ruggah from the beginning, because Ruggah could help him with stuff like that. Like, if you want someone to build structure in your team or figure out roles with the players, someone like a coach who's a veteran, and by the way, he's also Danish, would actually, I think, be like ideal for that. Whereas instead what you did is you sort of did them separately. Like, you kick BlameF, then when dev1ce gets to be IGL, he just magically gets Ruggah on day one, and so he just gets to start out the whole campaign. But everyone's just going to see it as like, dev1ce is great and BlameF was a bomb. Because my problem is, I think actually a lot of the narrative analysis just makes sense for why this move failed. Like, first of all, the obvious one, everyone who knows Counter-Strike knew this, which is BlameF and Stown almost certainly, whether on literal spots or tendencies, have an obvious overlap in how they see the game. So it's why I actually think the ultimate irony is people being like, I'm glad BlameF's out, that baiting passive player. It's like, well, yeah, you're like Stown, do you, mate? Like, it's the same thing. If you can't like one game, I don't know how you can enjoy the other. But I will say, that was one part I always thought was weird, which is why I think it's so silly they made BlameF the IGL Chad. Because to me, I still think you could take those 4 players before they got pro, and when, depending on what you want to do with Stay, you can have him be the 5th if you want. I think those players on paper, those 4, if you take Stay out, can work in a super team. You just have to have the 5th player be the in-game leader, obviously, and it'd have to be someone probably who's the opposite to BlameF. Like, I always got the sense since BlameF's a lurker, he's calling fairly loose because he's played his own game, doing a bit of lurk, and then he's, get the entry pack, we're ready to go, and then he called, I'm going on 38 seconds or whatever. Like, there's no way, there's no in-game leader I'm aware of who was ever a lurker who actually had like super tactical control over their team. Because you're not in the pack, how would you know what's happening? How could you trigger anything? How could you do what Chad knows? Like, every great in-game leader usually throws off the fucking flashes themselves. They take the annoying role where you have to go in first to bait the guy and get the attention. Like, so if you can't do any of that, there's no way you're going to be some super Astralis style in-game leader. So I think the other thing that was really silly was not only did they make a guy an in-game leader who had a role overlap with one of your stars you just signed for millions of dollars, but then on top of that, you're going to play loose CS with 2 players who just came from Heroic. Like, bro, if anything, these people desperately need structure. Like, we just talked about how Stown is someone who's like potentially gets nervous in the big moment and doesn't know what to do. Structure takes care of that. When you have like the game, that's why the Blade approach is brilliant. Blades is like almost like a meme. You can literally just pick up your homework and look at it right there on page between the round if you get lost. Like, that's brilliant if you're going to have any sort of nerve issues if you're inexperienced. Whereas I get the vibe they just thought, like, when he was with Complexity and when he was with the bad Astral, it's like, no, just frag out. And you'll just call a loose game. Remember, if you're the best player on your team like BlameF used to be, it might even be appropriate for you to get yours and just call a loose game, because actually that might be the best like min-max way to win with that lineup of players. And then lastly, I'll just say this angle, which is, I also think that the whole like he baits too much and all that angle is, that's where like not being a strong leader also doesn't work if you're going to be that type of player. Because I could totally believe, he actually reminds me of Nexa in this sense. Nexa, if you ask him to be in-game leader, will be in-game leader, but he'll even tell you like, I probably shouldn't be, And you think, well, why would you ever agree to do it? Like, because he thinks it's to be a good teammate to do that. So unfortunately, I actually think that's a rare example of where people need to say no, essentially. And sometimes you're actually being too unselfish when you sort of say, yes, I can do a job that basically I can't do. So sadly, I think for BlameF, it was just a clusterfuck of a bunch of things that he is. By the way, I also totally understand why to Chad, to just explain to a fan, this is why actually a lot of top pros don't like people like BlameF. Because unless you're the god lurker, unless you are like Rops last year and FaZe or Get Right back in the day, the problem is, unless you're just winning the game all the time, every single in-game leader likes the basics of Counter-Strike that are the meat and potatoes, which is you trade frag. And if you trade frag, you don't even have to be better than them. Mathematically, as long as we take more people to the site, we get the site, we plant the bomb. After that, by the way, I've done my job. It's on you boys to shoot more in the end. And so if you're the in-game leader, you hate the fucking guy who stays in dark tunnels on B and doesn't come in and the guy, Chad, where you do the rush B strat, he magically always gets caught on the wall or he doesn't quite jump it over and you're like, nah, I've seen this before. And so you have to understand, to people like Chad, you have to be a very special type of lurker before you're allowed to have that sort of status, I feel like, right?
It's tough, it's tough. But the thing is, the reason that like Blame doing it in modern era, we had Get Right doing it, we had Happy doing it, and Happy was super successful with it. Happy was like, I'll even take the bomb, boys. All you have to do is just draw some rotations and I'll win the round, right? And Happy could get away with it because they won majors. Like, we'll give you those.
Yes.
The problem with Blame, and I think this is it, and it lulled him into probably accepting the role over at Astralis. When you think about the fucking country we're talking about, Denmark, if you can't find a strong in-game leader and you need Blame to do it, what the hell are we doing? But I think it was the limited success he had in early complexity with Oboe, Rush, Poison, right? That early roster did have good success and it was exciting to see. But then I think when it comes crumbling down and then having to build out of the adversity, Blame, I don't know, like you mentioned in terms of in-game, I think out-of-game as well, probably struggling with a couple of those qualities required because he's also a young man and he hadn't been that experienced. And yeah, without having the support structure there, especially in modern-day Counter-Strike of having, an adult in the room of a coach and everybody there, felt like Astralis kind of just, they sided with him over Glaive, right? Which made sense at the time because Glaive had fallen out of meta as well. Blame was at least producing numbers. But a lot of Blame's playstyle, when you would watch it, would be like, let's just think about Nuke, for example. They would use the util to get him into Warehouse or get him into Secret. But players like that, if it's not forcing the rotation and then the kills are happening elsewhere on the map, they have to make the move, and they're a little bit more reluctant to do so because it means that they like play first. And that's sometimes some of the issue of using all your nades to get a key frag, a light Blame who can frag into space, but they just ice him out. It's like, it's Blame, guys. Just leave him in Warehouse. We won't fight him. Leave him in Secret. We won't fight him. It's all good. Then the rest of your players have no utility to finish the round with, right? And at that point, it does become quite difficult. So yeah, I think that if Blame wasn't a good team, he's in Fnatic now, so it's going to be a while before we see that. But if Blame wasn't a good team and playing a Rops-esque role, he'd be a fucking monster because he can clutch, yes. He shoots hard, he understands the position, and he won't have to micromanage or think about what the rest of his team's doing in the same way. He doesn't have to call for them. He doesn't have to pass any information. He literally just gets to react and give the tidbits he requires, and he should be able to dominate as somebody who's just a player. He will be very good as just a player. I'd be surprised. Well, the Fnatic, we'll see how long that lasts. But if he gets to a better team at some point, it'd be unlikely that he won't play well in that type of a role because he's very good.
I actually saw him. I was working on the desk when Fnatic played their first game, and it was fine. Fnatic was fine, but there were moments where I went, "Oh yeah, that's kind of why you get BlameF, because he's free to do a little bit more there." And I think that it works out better for him. Like you said, I don't think we'll see him pop off madly, but I do think he's in a better position when he's not calling. I've asked Thorin this before, but I'm going to ask you, Sponj, before we get into the device conversation. What do you think makes a good IGL?
Ooh, damn, there's a lot of qualities that go into making a good IGL. Shit. I think you need to be emotional, but in the right ways, right? Like because you need to have damn, I'm gonna get all like philosophy. Like, damn. All right, you've really put me on the spot with this one. I think what makes a good in-game leader in Counter-Strike is somebody who is always willing to sacrifice in any aspect, right? Not just in the game, but out of the game as well. You need to have high social intelligence to deal with your teammates. You can't just be someone who only can call good strategies and understands the game on the high level, because this is it's about people, right? And if you're able to motivate and inspire or even talk to people in the correct manner, you're going to get more out of them than you would if you were just, calling really bland strategy. And I think the key overall is the competitive hunger for a leader can never die. There can never be like a blemish on that. It can never be the point where, oh, this is getting too tough, or I don't want to do this anymore. Like if you're the leader of a team, maybe you do feel that way, but you can never let anybody else know that, because as soon as your teammates sense any weakness in that type of aspect, that's where there can be some of these situations where they stop believing in you, and people can't stop believing in the leader. I could go on about this for hours, but yeah, I'm just thinking about a few elements with it. Those are the things that come to mind. Could have been a bit more succinct, but yeah, there's a few elements, I think.
It's the way it sounded like he was like about to sort of like accidentally break in, and then they fucking kick you from the. I mean, and then sometimes you'll be removed from a team if that was to happen. Like I was so close to breaking through, wasn't he? I know. Okay.
I stepped down. I was too ashamed of letting Australia down that I was like, oh, fuck it, I'll get on a plane. I'll leave.
Sure.
Like, yeah, someone else to do a better job. Get me the fuck out of here.
But off the back of that, is dev1ce a good IGL from what you've seen so far?
So far, I think so. The sample size of events and the results they've had are like trending in the right direction. I think the questions a lot of people are going to have about somebody like dev1ce is, and this is what I saw as the sentiment when it was initially announced, was how he's going to handle the pressure of it, and whether that is in isolation of one match of Counter-Strike, or whether that is in a spree of poor results over time, and how will he be able to handle that if they continue to play poorly, which at the moment they don't have to worry about that. It's the honeymoon period right now. Everything's going great. The results they're getting are probably on par or even above their expectations. They're playing like what I would consider good Counter-Strike. He's coming up with some as far as the current meta of the game goes, some good ideas. And I also think that he is in a very fortunate position, having Stown and Yabby on his team, who are used to playing with an AWPing in-game leader. And you can see just their responses in the games that they played so far of how they're reacting. And there has to be more autonomy for your riflers if your AWPer is the in-game leader, because your AWPer cannot be in the same places doing the same jobs as those type of riflers. A rifler in that scenario, usually a couple, actually take up certain in-game leadership roles. Obviously they're not calling the shots necessarily, but they're playing positions where they have to relay an awful lot of information. So I think at the moment, it is very positive signs for dev1ce in the in-game leadership role. The questions are when they hit these speed bumps, and we haven't hit one of those yet. We have seen monitor punches, but that's classic for dev1ce. That isn't new for dev1ce. But how does that taper, and how does that affect the rest of his team? We all obviously have the flip side of that we also haven't seen. And we'll probably talk about this at some point, but Stown not necessarily being the best. Well, hold on, let me rephrase that. Stown not doing the best in big games, not doing well at all in big games. He has someone who knows exactly how that feels. And if dev1ce is able to work out whatever changed for him in the big matches and articulate that or enable Stown, then they're onto a roster that could be very successful.
Why do you think, Thorin, the trolls, a lot of trolls online were so anti this whole thing when it was announced with dev1ce's IGL? I mean, SPUNJ just touched on it a bit, but there was so much outrage about how this was the worst idea ever from Astralis.
I mean, I think two things that are pretty big is, one, it almost looked from the way it was framed with the fact that they didn't just do this move to start with. They obviously thought like BlameF being the in-game leader was the move for this super team when they bought those two heroic players for the bazillion dollars. So they did the move. Obviously they failed. And then they were like, it's okay, dev1ce is the in-game leader. That sounded like some cynical PR bullshit. It sounded like either dev1ce has told you like, look, get BlameF out and I'll just do it for like 2 months or something till we get Glaive back, or which is what literally people speculated, by the way, or we bring in like maybe we buy Snappy from Falcons. There was a million angles like that were around. So I think one, people just didn't believe it was real, and then two, and this is actually the more pertinent point, is in theory it shouldn't work. Like, if you even look at the two rare examples of someone who's like, I mean, I guess you can add Fallen as well, but I think that's more tenuous because to me he wasn't like constantly AWPing in the same way. The two examples of in-game leaders that work who are AWPers is obviously Jim and Cadian in the modern day. And if you look at them, none of them are like real top 10 players in the world. If they even make the HLTV top 20, that's just because their teams did well enough. And then in the case of Jamie, has like the ultimate beta style for that fucking rating formula for whatever reason. The problem is, when you look at dev1ce's game, the perception in Astralis was dev1ce is the best player. So the best player and our AWPer is now going to be the in-game leader, which historically, like, 2.5 people have made work as a role. And even when they made it work, they could never have been the AWPer dev1ce was. So I think the problem was people felt like, what's the point in this move? Don't we just lose in one regard? He's either not going to be as good in IGL, he's not going to do it long enough, or it'll just make him a worse AWPer. So the problem is, if you were a fan of the Astralis super team that they made with Stabby, BlameF, then you looked at it like, right, we've got all these star players, we've got our AWPer, like, we'll figure out the in-game lead thing. It felt like, right, so you've taken one star player off me. You brought, at the time, everyone thought the bro guy was a bomb. He looked like another stand-in. So you brought in a guy who just happens to be Danish. Stair's still finding his role. Wow, AWPer's going to be worse. And then his device, it just looked like it was a negative across the board. Like, I think a lot of people actually just thought this was like a makeshift roster waiting until, I don't know, next major cycle till someone's contract ends. And that wasn't a real lineup. So I think the reason why this whole thing's been so tricky to look at is, like, actually, I'll say this fully admit, I didn't actually do the video, but I thought about doing a video when this lineup was announced, just saying, like, this is a mess, this will never work. Like, I even would have said to dev1ce, I think it's a terrible idea in your career, mate. I mean, to tag on to what you were saying about pressure, I think the most underrated part that no one ever brings up about dev1ce is it's actually insane he still plays the game, because if people don't know, something like about 5-6 years ago, he developed like a similar thing to Get Right, where something with, I forget if it's like his intestines or his guts or what it is, but he has some sort of like chronic pain symptoms from that. And are you ready for the fucking punchline? They're exacerbated by stress. So I already used to think, bro, it's already sick enough that like you and Get Right could actually like win majors and MVPs while having that stress. If you have something that is exacerbated by stress, ask Chad over here, maybe in-game leader of a Counter-Strike team isn't the best route to go down, you know. It's not exactly the Bing chilling position. I mean, the joke about being an in-game leader is, I think Kerrigan or someone said this, like, sometimes they get so stressed at a major, you just don't go to sleep all night and you go, you know what, fuck it, let's watch more demos. Like, and so Everything combined, I think it's totally reasonable, by the way, to say it should have worked for dev1ce. In fact, if he actually makes this work and becomes like a champion again, I think it'll be the most unique career pivot probably ever.
Sorry, I was going to say, I think one of the reasons as well on paper when it was initially announced that they're going this way was you took somebody as strong as a rifler of BlameF out of the roster. So the headline didn't just read dev1ce to in-game lead. It read BlameF with star numbers removed. So it was like, well, what are you doing here? You're cutting off your nose to spite your face in a way, when the idea would have been, hey, maybe remove one of the other guys, obviously not Stown or Yabby, and then bring in an in-game leader and play the roster like that.
Yes.
Right? That I think also factored into it quite heavily, with people being a little bit turning their nose up to it. And also it is such a massive punt for somebody like dev1ce at this point of his career, where he is just returning to being an active player who's actually playing games and not being on the bench with some dog shit fucking roster where he's getting given nobodies. And then he goes, I'm just going to lead. Like, it did seem like it was out of left field. And that's the thing. There's conversation around the Astralis stuff, like, oh, this was, you know, they were telling him he has to do this. I don't know. I don't know either way what the scenario is over there. But he said he wanted to do it, right? That's what dev1ce has said. And if he wanted to do it, then, and he always was thinking of going in this way, I think he might have the temperament. Look, if he can obviously not do the monitor punching, well, actually, maybe he can do them. Look at Apex, right? But the thing is, he would have always been looked at by, especially you think about how young the team is around him. When dev1ce was winning majors, these kids were in their diapers after high school, like going home and watching him. He is the leader for them.
High school's like for you, Chad. But okay.
Yeah, hey, you know, it's changed a lot. I'm looking at the new age high school kids.
Okay.
So I'm trying to upset as many Zoomers as possible.
Oh, it's all good.
Yeah, but they would have looked up to him as the guy, major MVP. Like, you know, he is the guy. Like, Glaive was there, sure, Magis was there, Dupree. dev1ce he is the guy. Like. So I think that in terms of the belief he has from the players around him, that was immediate. The buy-in there would have been immediate onto that. And now I feel like the work ethic, when you have a happy team, goes up. Everybody wants to buy in. Everybody wants to contribute. For Bro, he's probably glad he got out of that Monty team where he was the whipping boy. He was the one who was copping it, like Gizmy and Ryu were copping it at EPO when Demko and Warro were having a shit time, right? It was him, because he... Not only did he play all the bitch roles, he was still a player who's come from the academy roster, like the academy scene. So you're just naturally going to cop more flack. Now he's with people his own age. I've seen them at the events. They have a really good rapport. They're doing like teenage boy fucking wrestling. I'm thinking like, what's going on? You know, that they're actually enjoying themselves. Like, they're actually having a good time. And Bro, as a support player, I think he's very good. Like, the thing with Bro is he actually understands what he has to do. He's not playing for numbers. He's playing to play his role. And those type of players are difficult to come by as well. But to know that he was going to do that when in Monty, it was just like, oh, this guy's he's just there. He's just filling out the number. He's already looking solid. And I think he can contribute. If he becomes clutch, that's a whole new facet, right? Like, that'll come up with time, because he will find himself in these late round Zipex situations where he will have to be clutch because of the positions he plays. If he can become clutch, that's really, really strong for Astralis as a whole. But I think just to dial back in on dev1ce, one thing that I was curious about when I was thinking about this conversation we were going to have today, let me see if I can rack my brain for this, was Duncan, do you think, sorry, Sam, I know that you're the one asking the questions, but Duncan, do you think that dev1ce still has the ability to take over playoff games on his own?
You mean specifically if he's the in-game leader, or just in general?
Yeah, well, like right now. Like, let's say they're in a big playoff game right now. Do you think, because we haven't seen it yet?
Yes.
But
basically, that's the thing I'm worried about, actually, Chad. Is it's funny because actually when she suggested this topic for this episode, I could have said, like, well, you know, it's probably going to be quite a positive episode, because actually Astralis is awesome right now. Like, I think everyone who watches them is really impressed. But actually, the reason why I knew there was more conversation to have is because even though I actually think Astralis has become one of my favorite teams to watch, that's the big question I still have, Chad, is everyone wants to tell dev1ce already, like, well, you did it. You made history. You were the only one ever who could do it. It's like, whoa. No, because actually what I want to see, like you're saying, is put me in a Cologne or a major and put me in the big quarterfinal, not just a normal match. I want like a top 4 team. Put them against Vitality or FaZe or Team Spirit. can dev1ce actually like carry against the other AWPer, like a Shiro? Can he really do that and IGL the game and win? Like, if he can, by the way, that's why I said earlier, it will be the greatest career pivot in the history of Counter-Strike, or maybe esports, by the way. Because as far as I can tell, I think it's hard enough to be any kind of a star and be the in-game leader. To be the AWPer as well, and in his teams, let's be real, his teams didn't use the AWP like Cadian's Heroic, where it's like use it for one pick-off or to cover an off-hanger. He was the guy when he was the AWPer in Astralis. Like, he was the guy moving all around the map, like outplaying these stars, setting up trap. I don't know how you're going to do that and be the AWPer. So it's actually the main thing I'm still waiting to see, Chad, because at the moment his numbers are way too good, and it looks like it's all dev1ce. But I agree with you. That's more. It's not just Down and the team in general. I do think the other thing is you don't get the same like dominant dev1ce performance so far when they get to that big match in the semis or the final or whatever, where usually they're playing the team they've already beaten in the tournament. You know.
It's interesting because the question that you asked was something that I wanted to bring up, because it was a matter of like, if you've been to an event, both of you have with dev1ce, you'll know that the media, the moment Astralis comes off, when it comes to interviews and stuff, every sideline reporter, every media, they're like those seagulls. They're like dev1ce. Everyone wants to speak to him. Everyone wants him in a video. Now you've also got to be the superstar, because that's your job. You are the superstar player. You need to pop off in those big games. You need to make a difference. And now you got to IGL. And like you said, Chad, there's so much on your back. That is so much pressure, so much stress. And on top of that, you've got a situation where physically that is debilitating to you. That was like my biggest concern when they made this move, was how is it possible for you to do all of that? And like Thorin said, it's great. If you get it right, it'll be the greatest story of all time. But it can go so horribly wrong as well.
Yeah, I think that they're pretty insulated at the moment. That Astralis are one of the teams who like to say no to media requests. So they have a couple of people with them most of the time. Either Casper's there, they have a manager with them. They've also got some, I forget the guy's name, but he's a badminton bloke. So they have people there who are going to say no on their behalf. So I think from that perspective, they're able to mitigate a few of those issues. And I also think that something, since he was having those problems, 5-6 years, because it was a Sydney event, I think it was, where those, or was that Dupree? Either way, they were having qualms with that, and long travel was an issue for it too. But I think that his health is something that dev1ce takes pretty seriously, right? Like, he seems like a type of guy to stay in shape. And if you know you have that type of issue and you're going to perform in a professional capacity, he's not out there eating the fucking Doritos and just drinking the Red Bull. Like, he's actually taking his health quite seriously. So if he's able to mitigate those dramas, then I think it's going to come down to the performance in the big games. And the perspective that Duncan was bringing up before, one of the things is, we have to wait and see it. But it's also like, for me, the question is it necessary for him to do that so the team can break through the barrier and then you can get more out of your Stound, right? Like, are you going to be able to take the horse to the water and make it drink, right? Because I feel like if dev1ce gets you across the line and they contribute, shit, we all feel the win, it's great, and then maybe that confidence come with it. Look at Mouse at the moment. They're not afraid of anybody because they know they can win. Like, obviously, studio environment lands, that's where they do their best work, but confidence in Counter-Strike in that regard is, especially in CS2, where Pika's advantage isn't as big as it was a couple months ago, but still pretty big. People love swinging. And you need to have the confidence in your fights to be able to get away with that. So if dev1ce can carry them in a big game to get them to the promised land, it might be how they unlock some of these guys who have had a tougher time performing in Heroic when the pressure's on. Or does he know something Counter-Strike wise, right? Some little trick, some mental thing. Is he able to set the correct demeanor or mood? Because we also don't know in the Astralis roster, right, who was setting the temperament for the team, who was making sure everybody was in the right headspace. Where did that come from? Who was the leader of that? Was it the coach? Was it Dupree? He made a joke and that set the right mood after they lost like a anti-eco round or some shit. Because those little elements, they're important to have. And we don't know if that's what parts of that come from dev1ce or what parts that he even remembers that he can pick up and transplant and bring with him, or what he can nurture out of the other players around him. And that's the personal side of Counter-Strike, the people side of Counter-Strike that we will very rarely even get a look into. So that is the unknown that we might not ever know. The only way we'll see is if they get the results which they could be destined for, right? And that's shit, because like, what other analysis can I give? Other like I can't put any like. And
no, this is one of the hardest teams to analyze ever because, like I say, like what they're trying to do was basically never been done before. So if they do it, like by the way, it will revolutionize Counter-Strike, and everyone will go and see it's possible, and this is the blueprint. But until they do it, like for now, every historical rule says it probably shouldn't work.
You wait, Nico. You know? Duncan's next. He'll start in game.
I know that's the other fear in it.
4 or 5 years time, I will start doing it.
I'll tell you a mad angle as well I've got for you, Chad, because this is like the sexy drama angle no one's thought of because it's so bonkers when you think it through. Remember, when Stown and Yabby joined this team, they did join, presumably, like if people don't know, the story Richard reported was actually the guy Casper, who now works, Casper Straub, who now is like basically in the head role. He was that guy at Heroic, basically, so they wanted to stay with him, and apparently he had like a really close relationship with Stown when he went through some hard times in his life or something. So that's what they claim is the reason that they left. It wasn't just like they hate Cadian or Heroic sucks or whatever. But imagine, right, if you think of the current rumours going on right now, Chad, being Cadian, right? Everyone was on your side because everyone thought these guys are scumbags, you know. Cadian got the big sign up to Liquid with the super team. Oh, brilliant. Yeah, he's going to succeed. Then the Astralis super team fails. Everyone's loving it. Like, yeah, get them, Cadian. They deserve what they get. Now, right, if you're Cadian, you're like tomorrow morning, that email comes up. I'm sorry, Cadian, we're going to have to call you in the office Monday off. Right, so you're going in to get fired. As you're going in to get fired, right, you're thinking of the most recent tournaments, and Stown and Yabby have, let's see, a better version of an ARPing in-game leader. They've just replaced you. That's like pulling up the Instagram of your ex-girlfriend, and she's dressing up in exactly the same thing for you. The new lads used to for you. Like that was my outfit. I bought that. What the hell? That was supposed to be for my birthday. Like, imagine being fucking Cadian now, mate. It's been absolutely wrecked, hasn't It's been absolutely wrecked.
I don't even know where Cadian goes from here.
No, what do you do? I know, it just sucks, doesn't it?
Oh.
It's like a proper soap opera, which I'm loving every moment of it. I realize I always just feel like I don't understand why like middle-aged women
the twists and turns are mad on this one. Yeah, the twists and turns are mad on this.
Absolute favorite. But just to get back to that Astralis line, because we've spoken a lot about like the emotions and the feelings and all of that, but let's talk about what we're actually seeing in the server. Are the players around dev1ce strong enough for him to lead them to glory, Thorin?
The interesting thing about that is I obviously can't say for broad state because I have to just see them in playoffs of majors, in playoffs of big tournaments. They're like at the moment, like what they've been doing is better than expected, but like until you're tested in that crucible in Counter-Strike, you can never really know with a player. The biggest thing for me is actually what Chad said earlier about Stown. Like, this is also why I don't think the original plan ever was that dev1ce became in-game leader. I think that happened after the BlameF crisis point was reached. Because I also think it's not even the way you would do it if you wanted to develop Stown. Like, what Chad's saying is perfect. If dev1ce had stayed as the ARPer but not in-game leader, that probably could have gotten Stown over the hump. Because if he goes to that big playoff match, that's what he never had in Heroic, Chad. In Heroic, it had to be Stown who was the carry. Because like Yabby was like an impact player maybe, but he's not like a hard carry production star. And obviously Tessus and Shush were always role players, and Cadian was just like kind of an all-round player. He wasn't really like a hard carry ARPer. So to me, there was always a lot of pressure on Stown in Heroic. I think actually if you'd have had dev1ce as just a star ARPer, it was probably one of the most consistent star ARPers ever. I actually think that would take a lot of pressure off your shoulders in those matches if you're Stown and give you sort of a bit of breathing room to open your game up. So that's also why if dev1ce doesn't do as well in these settings, I think it's actually going to increase. Because at the moment, by the way, there's the other problem you have if you're Stown, Chad. Nobody is going to blame dev1ce because one, he is the in-game lead, and two, it's dev1ce. Like, we're all going to give him a pass if he has a bad game. If you're Stown, everyone is literally sat there looking at the scoreboard the second you enter that playoff game, and the second you're not near the top, they're getting tweets ready, and you're watching the rounds go by, and it's just that people are waiting to hit on you. You're the specific one they're going to say didn't carry the game. So I do think that dynamic is the one to look for.
I just was looking at the average age of the team. It's only 22.7, right? And dev1ce brings it up a lot. He's 28 when the rest of them are all still in their early 20s. So one of the tough things to label here is how good Yabby and Stown can be, because I don't think I think we've seen Stown play his best Counter-Strike, but not play his best Counter-Strike when he needs to, right? Or to get them the titles. So we know what Stown's ceiling is. Yabby, I think, has definitely had patches where he can play very, very good, but I still think, maybe now that he's in this team and he must feel like a very core part of it, he's one of the 3 most experienced members of this team, which feels crazy to say, considering where he was only a couple years ago. Maybe with that added responsibility, he will start, he might play a more, I don't want to say responsible game because that makes it sound like he's playing safe, but take more responsibilities within the game. Feel like, it's part, like he is part of this the core of this team. So I think that those three are going to be solid. It is, like Duncan said, with Stair and Bro. Now with Stair, I've only heard good things. I remember when he was playing for Sprout, we were doing a Pro League season, and the way that he was taking map control, he was very solid and smart in his decision making, right? So he already checks the box there for me as one of those players. And then, now this was a very short stint, so take from this what you will. But Azza played for Sprout as an in-game leader for a very small amount of time. And I've been playing a lot of Face It with Azza over the last couple of months. And we were talking, he watches still all the Counter-Strike, and he was telling me about Stair, because Stair was on that roster at the same time. And he said Stair has in-game leader level communication. So for Aaron and I, essentially, like, Aaron was the in-game leader, not initially after I left. I think it went to Yam, but then Aaron picked it up, a little bit later down the track, and Aaron was the in-game leader of the team when they came top 4 at the Berlin Major. He is... did Dexter make top 4 at a major? Either way, he's one of the most he's probably the most accomplished Australian in-game leader, right? So when Aaron talks about that, and I know what he expects communication-wise, because it's what I expected communication-wise, when he says that about somebody like Stair, and in the positions that Stair plays, that's another huge green light for me. Because if you have a player who is doing a lot of map control, and then they're not just like an ape, right? They're not out there just getting the kill. They're getting the kill, the space, and they're disseminating the information correctly so your team can react. That's huge. That's why in-game leaders play a lot of those map control positions, is because they're the ones who need to flow that information. Now, if you have another player who can do that, I can tell you this much. I'm pretty sure that Stown and Yabby would have had to have done portions of this on Cadian's Heroic. Because
if you saw, they actually claim that in this team, they want Stown to be like a secondary voice or something, right?
Yeah, but I think that you might need more than a few, because I think dev1ce, being the AWPer in the team, can call his shots, in the sense that I will go and pick here early. But if he doesn't have a spawn for a peak, you see him in a lot of these rounds. He's setting his teammates up. He's throwing the util, right? And then if he's not calling his shots, well, then the rest of them now get the ability to do so. And I think that the more of them that are willing to talk, and the flow of information and for Bro, now it's in Danish and not in broken English, I think that just the quickness of that plays into the strength that was Heroic. How quick they were able to react or be proactive and assemble the correct decision. Think about all the choices Heroic was making in fucking split seconds. When they were the team that was moving the most, the level of comms that you must be having in those moments is insane. You're never letting the game miss a beat. It's like, okay, this has happened, let's do this. This has happened, let's do this. And then you just had Shush on the other side of the map to anchor down one area. They'd come his way. He'd get a couple kills. So look, I went away from the point a little bit here, but I think Stair will be a strong voice. I think Yabby and Stown already know what it means to be a strong voice around an AWPing in-game leader. I think that they have the right pieces at the moment to go deep in tournaments. I think they could be top 8 at the next major. I don't think that's too much of a stretch. But it's just how many reps of playoffs can they get under their belt between now and then? Will there be a rough patch, or will they continue to succeed in this fashion? Because if they do, they'll level up quickly. That experience factor for Bro and Stair, I think, will be the difference maker. Because if they can go to a couple more playoffs deep, we're talking semifinals, maybe they make a big stage like Cologne, that'll do wonders for them going into Shanghai. And depending on where the rest of the scene finds itself, I think that they're in a really strong position to have a run, or to be in the conversation for a run, based off the age of the players, the ability of the players, and the type of Counter-Strike they're playing. Because it's comprehensive. It's not one-dimensional. It's not gimmicky. It's not one player carrying. So I think it's too early to say like they're the full package, because we need to learn more about what these players have to offer. But right now we just have green lights. We only have green lights. We don't have any red lights. We have a couple speed bumps coming up that we need to get over, but we only have green lights.
By the way, it's also underrated that they get to all speak Danish as well. Because I agree with you on the Heroic point. I think that's actually one of the biggest things you've also seen that Cadian struggle with in Liquid is that same call isn't the same call if it takes half a second longer, and then the person themselves has to like go, oh wait, I don't speak first language English. Oh yeah, that's what you meant. Like that's different from when you just say it and it's the person you played with for 2 years in their language, exactly the way that you normally say it, and they just know exactly what you mean. So I do think if Astralis can capture that aspect that they used to have in Heroic, then they had that. But it's weird when you consider Na'Vi just won the major as probably like what the 8th best team before the tournament. Like It's not implausible. This is a dark horse winner of the Shanghai Major. Like, they've got the time. They're tracking up the right kind of like graph progression. It's just as Chad says, you've got to like get a good run at like another big LAN. Maybe even if I mean, obviously the dream would be win one, but if you could just get that experience bump up, then by the time the major comes, like this team has the capability to do it.
The original like origin story of dev1ce though, and that magical Astralis run, because Astralis fans are unforgiving, right? They just constantly talk about how they want that again. But I wonder in modern day Counter-Strike, and specifically now in CS2, do you think we'll ever see a team be able to recreate something like that, or has the game changed too much?
Unless there's something about CS2 that we don't know about, I don't think we'll ever have a team be as dominant for as long again. I think that there are too many people trying to build strong teams all the time. And the only way that could happen is if there was, everybody for whatever reason, besides like one strong team, decided they should all rebuild, and they would have a massive head start unless like some god tier roster was formed. I think the thing is, we've had different stages throughout Counter-Strike, which we did on the time travel land, Duncan. We spoke a lot about this, but there was different eras where certain in-game leaders brought strong styles of CS in, and now most teams are playing what would be considered a complete version of Counter-Strike, in the sense that the Astralis era, what that ushered in probably the most was structured CS, as well as the pinpoint precision of the utility. Right now, everybody is precise with utility. Nobody's wasting nades. People are great at mid-round calling. I think, what I honestly think the Blast Paris Major did? It reminded the top teams that you can't just play default CS because of teams like Apex, just doing out of the pocket, just fast calls and executes into sites. And they were playing old school momentum based CS. So teams have had to bring that back into their gameplay now, and especially in MR12. If you're not ready for everything and you get snowballed by like 2 fast execute rounds, I think you're fucked. But I don't think you can ever get back to that success. And I think Astralis fans should really temper those level of expectations. I think if they win a major at any point in the next couple of years, take that as a fucking victory, because your team once upon a time did what nobody else ever did and will probably never do again. So, and that's just, and they elevated the game to its best level. So, take that as the one thing that you can carry, and just be proud if you have a team that can compete, I'd say.
You had one chocolate bar. Don't be so greedy and try and grab the whole bag, is what you're saying. Breaking the hearts of Astralis fans all over the place. Cheeky question from my side, though, and it's completely off topic, but seeing as we're talking about Astralis and the whole stubby move happened so recently, and there was the Cadian breakup, I got to bring it up because it's been a topic of conversation. What happens to Cadian now, though, Thorin? Because if the rumors are true, he's going to be out of a job. And then this whole Astralis heroic liquid supernova and whatever it's called in Brazil, I think it's a supernova or something, whatever. It's a mess. Like, it just completely shakes up once again.
There's a serious answer and a joke answer. So the joke answer is, welcome Fnatic Cadian. So there you go. That's just a mean joke for everyone involved, by the way. No one deserves that, But the reason I make it a joke answer, the more serious point is, I actually do think, by the way, despite all the positive sentiment so many media and fans have for Cadian, I think he is in an incredibly difficult situation if he wants to get in a world-class team again. Because the rod he has made for his own back is, he doesn't, unlike dev1ce, have any condition of like, I just like IGL and AWP because they asked me to. He wants to do both simultaneously. And as I just pointed out, look, no one is thus far who dev1ce is doing this, but like, that role, the problem I think you have is people like Jim and him got to do it because, first of all, they never went to other teams. They just sat in their team and had people build around them and buy into their system and agree that's what they were all willing to do. And by the way, maybe they didn't agree at the end. Maybe that's part of why the stabby departure happened. Maybe eventually it got too much. Maybe they did think he was calling around himself, or he was too much in the media. Who knows what it could be? So the problem, I think, is this. You look at other teams. What team, like, there's plenty of teams who would want this guy as just an in-game leader. There might even be some teams, by the way, who would want him just as an AWPer. But is there anyone who wants him as both? And then lastly, like I've alluded to earlier, unfortunately, even though I actually think Liquid was looking better and better each event, and I wouldn't have pulled the plug this early, the thing that I find most disturbing is They never did in Liquid, though, look anything like Heroic, though. Like Heroic, like Chad said, had super tight team play. They had the fastest rotations and map movements of anyone in the scene. That looked like it disappeared once he stopped calling in Danish, quite frankly. So if you add all these factors together, like, isn't there like Venn diagram overlap of like you need an AWPer and an in-game leader and potentially speak Danish? Like, how many teams have we got left? Does he have to just go like Gaming Gladiators or something? You know what I mean? Like, at that point, you haven't got many squads left in the world. So unfortunately, I actually do feel like, even though I think he could do a bunch of roles at world-class level, I get the feeling he's going to be either on like a kind of a joke team or he's going to be in a really tough spot, assuming he has to do this for the rest of his career.
Yeah, I think for Casper from this point on, it's going to be quite difficult because of what Duncan's stating about having both of those roles, unless he's willing to drop the AWP and just lead. But I also think that something that needs to be said regarding the Heroic roster and it finding success, there's two keys. One, they were willing to make roster changes when maybe it didn't always feel necessary, but they could feel it in the team, like with Borup and Nico, for example, going, right? They would always look for these upgrades. Nobody even really saw them coming. They just appear and it's like, okay. So they were always really cognizant of how things were trending inside the server, right? Or within the team dynamic, and it was happening. And we were like, oh, okay. And then we would see how it would progress. But the other, and I want to, well, I'm not saying what I'm saying right now with like any, it's not meant with any like, malice is the wrong word. I'll just say it and we can work out the bullshit that comes with it after. Heroic was a team that had this us versus the world mentality.
Yeah.
The Hunden drama, the stuff that happened with Stound's brother, all of these things that happened across the time that they would build inwards.
Even everyone saying they choked, they kind of tried to make that like a thing they were battling, didn't they?
It was fuel, and everybody built in. And the way that Alex and I, for so many years, would be framing this team was they were a brotherhood, right? And that was a point of pride, it felt like, for the team, and saying that Cadian was the leader, and everybody would follow that leader, right? Everybody would follow him into battle. They would die for one another. That's the kind of mentality that team was able to breed. And I don't think that if Cadian joins a roster that is already existing, that same mentality will be there. It has to be built from the ground up. And the most likely way to do that is with a Danish team. Like, Duncan, you say Gaming Gladiators, but let's say they grab a couple of players from like Sashi or Gaming Gladiators or whoever else is fucking left from the Danish scene, and he tries to rebuild in that way. That would be his best way to try and step back up those rungs. And if he does it again, that's hugely impressive. But again, it requires the correct personalities that will buy into wanting to be a part of yet another like brotherhood. And then for Cadian to have to do it again, that is fucking tough. You've already been through the emotional ringer of doing that once, and like they went through tougher times than anybody, I would say, in recent Counter-Strike history regarding drama and bullshits in real life and all of this stuff. They've been through the absolute ringer. So I think that is one of the strengths that made Heroic such a force, is because of the belief in one another. And the fact that it came to the end in such a calamity, right? With the whole roster changing, who wants who out, then they're going to Astralis, then this, and the real drama, because the whole thing that they were also built against was they weren't even the favorite Danish team. The other Danish fans all loved Astralis. So not only did they have the rest of the world against them, they even had their own fucking people. And then they broke through, and then two of the boys left for Astralis. So like multiple knives in the back, right? Like feeling it from all angles. So I think that really, unfortunately for him, the only way back from this point is to start again. And that's fucking tough. That's tough.
It's interesting, the brotherhood thing. If you have a look though at the Astralis lineup we're talking about, I mean, I always felt, obviously the drama was fun with the whole Stabby fiasco, but I felt the way it was handled and played out on social media and the amounts of hate that they got, and I thought that was really rough on both of those players. Obviously the Astralis lineup device has been through a lot of that as well. Then you've got young bro who got so much criticism coming in, and then after BlameF had left, it was kind of like he was the disappointment. That they've got a lot of these struggles building up in Astralis as well, and I wonder if that brotherhood, you can't force that, right? But it seems to be building, and it looks like, I mean, Sponge, you've seen them more on land than the rest of us, but it does look like there is kind of a friendship, for want of a better term, brewing. So maybe the brotherhood of Heroic changes form slightly, and you've got device. It's not necessarily the loud, energetic Cadian. It's more the sort of the older big brother that you can look up to, who's protecting all of you and taking you forward.
There's the picture. There's the picture that they put on social media to talk Cadian. It's like, I've got a new big brother now. And it's just device. Like, he's even better than you.
I think the thing with that big brother is he won 4 majors and was
Pretty good.
an MVP at 2. So, even I think that, definitely the demeanor of the players together, they actually seem like they get along, right? You see some teams, they don't even really hang out and shit. These guys were together all the time. They were always talking. They always seemed like they were in a good mood. So I think definitely building in a strong way there. The one for me that we haven't touched on is Ruggah, who this is the fucking opportunity of a lifetime for this guy, right? And then he gets to be there. And I think actually his struggles in OG, because I'm speculating here. I don't know if he had he probably had say over what players they were getting, but he probably didn't have say over how much money they could spend.
Sure.
I'm sure there are so many better players that Ruggah wanted to get over the years, but he got what he was given, and he tried to do the best he could with it. But now he's with somebody who's taking over in-game leadership for the first time. He's had to nurture players who were literally nobodies, right? And try and help them understand the macro game of Counter-Strike from a coaching perspective, dealing with players who didn't even want to be in-game leaders, like Nexa, and trying to help them and build a system. And he has probably been through more methods of attempting to coach a team to success than we can even think of, because OG would have been shit. Like that's the fact of the matter.
For sure.
And now he has been able to refine that over time, come into a Danish team, and have some really strong players. So I've always liked Ruggah. He's always a really nice guy, great to talk to, but you can only look at the resume, and the resume, unfortunately for him from a coaching perspective, is miserable. The most success he is having is right now, like with this team. So I want to see how he develop. I guess the thing is, if the team does well, then he does well. That's all that matters, right? That's literally all that matters here. So yeah, I'm curious. I'd love to hear more about Ruggah, but every time we ask these players about coaches and everything like that, we rarely get any real insights. So another one of these mysteries that we'll have to wait until everybody's older and knows how to talk. That'll be fun.
We've spoken a lot now, so it's time for you to let us know what you think. We've got quite romantic towards the end here, talking about dev1ce and Astralis in this team. So let us know, do you think that the Astralis dream is alive? Is it kicking? You can tell us in the comments.